afternoon and to everybody joining today. Thanks for joining the Lace Partners webinar. Good to see everyone starting to arrive. We're just going to give a couple more minutes to do so. My name's Aaron. I'm the Managing Director and Co-founder at Lace Partners. I'm going to be your compere for today's webinar. Well, thanks again for everyone joining today. Appreciate it. Today's webinar is focused on the move to the cloud for HR. We've named it Getting HR's Head into the Cloud. Going to really sort of focus in today on that initial stage of building the case for moving to the cloud, getting the drivers ready for that, and getting yourself and your businesses ready for moving HR into cloud and into cloud technology. I'm joined by three panelists today. Matt Jolley from AVEVA, Global Director of HRIS at AVEVA, champion of AVEVA's digital people journey, and you've been with AVEVA through its hypergrowth period over the last 8 years. Matt, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you with us, and we're going to be reflecting on some of that journey you've already undertaken in moving to the cloud. I'm also joined by Jo Munday from Investec, UK Head of People Operations. Been with them since 2021 and recently taken on the digital and tech lead role there, Jo. So this is squarely now in your ballpark, I believe.
Absolutely, thank you.
Welcome to the panel. And then last but not least on our panel, part of our Lace exec, those of you who've seen him on webinars before, Max Bailey is joining us, also known as our tech savvy Kiwi on the panel. Max, welcome.
Thanks, Aaron. Great to be here.
Brilliant. And no, there's undoubtedly there's been a lot of change in the marketplace in the last couple of years, not least through the pandemic, and a lot of project work was postponed during 2020 and moved to 2021. And so I think we've seen a real explosion in the market of people starting to move to the cloud, but also a real understanding of maybe some of the gaps in data, some of the gaps in information and technology that hampered some of the response to COVID from the HR functions. And so there's been a real demand growing in the market for moving off of on-premise traditional systems to cloud-based systems for HR. It's also a period at which there's a lot of heightened competition between the main providers in the market. And so a great time for buyers who are looking to move their technology into the cloud for HR. So some real drivers there. I'm going to investigate a little bit of that during the session today. Before we do, it'd be great just to get a feel from those attending the webinar as to where you are in your journey. We're going to run a little poll now. And ask you some questions very quickly, or a question very quickly about where you are in your own journey, just so as we, as a panel, talk about it, we can understand where you are. So what stage are you at in your journey to the cloud? So a good mix of people on the call with different experiences. Thank you so much for filling that in. Quite a few of you in that earlier stages, as you'd expect, given the title of this, getting ready for the prep on that, or thinking about the case change. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that in the questions today. And I'm sure Jo and Matt will share their experiences around that with you, but also a few of you there in the latter stages in that mid-implementation as well. So maybe some reflections from yourselves in the chat as we go through as well to share with others on the call would be great. Thanks for all of that. I'm going to kick off and get underway with some questions. So I'm going to start, Matt, with yourself first, if that's all right. So you've already started that journey to the cloud. You've got some of your technology there at AVEVA. It'd be great to understand some of your motivation for moving to the cloud.
Yeah, no, sure. I guess firstly, as a software company ourselves, we have a high-level strategy to move all our products into the cloud. And that's kind of filtered down into our internal technology as well. So we have a goal to move where we can all our internal technology into the cloud. I guess the other part to that is, as a company that's rapidly grown and acquired over the years, we need software that can really support that So support that growth, support that agility. And I guess some of the legacy sort of on-premise solutions aren't best suited for that level of change, a level of configurability. So we need really a product that can support us, along through that journey.
Excellent. And as you say, we see that quite often, Matt, I think, in terms of that motivation partly can be around that growth strategy of the business and wanting technology that will keep up as you go through. It'd be great to reflect a little bit in a minute around sort of whether those expectations have been met. But I'm just going to ask Jo, if I may. Jo, as you start your journey towards the cloud, what is motivating you for that journey?
A couple of things really. A little bit similar to Matt in terms of our growth and our ability to change. We'd kind of managed our businesses quite separately in our north and south regions. So we've got a big component in South Africa and a big component in the UK. And our technology was completely different. So when I joined Investec, we had two different instances of our HR system in operation. So there was a project to bring those together, but that was on an on-premise solution. So we had the limited ability to change quickly. We've seen that a little bit in COVID, that we just want to kind of be able to increase functionality out there for managers and employees, and haven't been able to do that very simply. And we've had a different kind of IT strategy come in over the past year or so, different leaders who are very much pushing the move to cloud as well, whereas that was a bit of a stumbling block beforehand. So there's a few things that have aligned. From a HR perspective, we want to kind of really transform our current solution. We've got various best of breed cloud solutions in place, and that is helping us kind of be a bit more nimble. But our core solution is very outdated. So it just really impedes us. So that there's some kind of things that have aligned for us at this time for us to move forward.
Excellent. Thanks, Jo. And I was just interested from both of you, actually, whether COVID as an experience over the last year or so, as challenging as that's been for HR functions, whether that was a contributing factor to you now looking to the cloud.
I think it's added, isn't it, Aaron, in terms of the future of work, things becoming digital. We've seen the increase in Zoom calls, in Teams calls, and that's kind of filtered through in terms of HR process, right, and what the expectations are. People expect to be able to do things digitally, as they would their banking, their shopping, everything else. So I think that's accelerated the need for change from where I see it.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, we were already thinking about this journey beforehand, but it's helped us, I think, clarify, especially from a leader perspective, being able to give people data when they need it, enact processes when they need to, not need to have a face-to-face conversation with someone from HR, act much more globally. Our workforce, we're thinking about how we build our workforce in future, so there'll be more roles based in different locations, and we need to be able to support that from an HR perspective much more quickly than we can at the moment.
No, thanks for that. And just interestingly, if you think about your business case, and you saw there from the poll, there's a number of people at the early stage building their case for change. You talked there about some of the motivations as an HR function for moving. How are you selling it to the business? What benefits are they expecting to get from this move to the cloud? And I'm going to ask Max after that just to sort of reflect on it as well. But maybe, Jo, if I can start with you on that question.
One of the things we're looking to drive, and it's more of a softer benefit rather than a kind of cost benefit, is the employee experience. That's something that's always in the back of our minds. Now, from an HR perspective, we won't be able to kind of deal with everything all at once, but actually being able to create tools that are much more intuitive, much more easy to use, and actually it just kind of becomes part of the work. And that's really critical in how we think about performance, how we think about learning, for example. It should be just integrated in the work that's being done rather than as an aside, an extra add-on. So that's really important. And I think over time, we will look to build that infrastructure to think about the interaction with our finance systems, the interaction with our IT systems now. Don't want to bore the ocean in the project we're doing at the moment, so we're really focusing on the kind of people processes, but we're really actively thinking like that. And as a bank, we think about what our client experience is, and we haven't applied that really rigidly internally. So we're really motivated along those lines. And I think the other strategy we're thinking about from an HR perspective is how to put the work in the right place, especially from a leader perspective. So do they need to come to HR to restructure what my team looks like and make sure that happens? No, you don't need to be involved in those conversations. As a leader, I should be able to do it, but our systems don't help us on that. So there's a kind of guiding principles that we have from a HR, we call it P&O at Investec, perspective, people in org. What's the employee experience? How do we help that? And how do we kind of get rid of some of the transactional pieces and put the work in the right place? So those are kind of our guiding principles, and hopefully will play out in benefits, and there will be, some longer term cost benefits realised through that. But we're not really motivated by that conversation so much. We need to kind of have that in the business case, but that's kind of less of an impact. We do have costs in our current system, like ongoing support costs, which are over and above what we'd like to pay. But broadly, I think we know that a cloud solution in terms of licensing and costs will be kind of like for like for what we pay for an on-premise solution at the moment.
And we'll come back to that, I think, Jo, if we can. That was fantastic to hear. And we'll come back on the employee experience element as well. Matt, if I may ask you the same question, benefits the business are expecting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's people that work in HR functions, employee experience is something that I think everyone is looking at now, right? And it's certainly very high on our agenda. I think, again, for me, a lot of it's around self-sufficiency. As someone who manages a technology in the organisation from our HR perspective, we want to be able to add value to the business as much as we can. And I think a big part of that is having ownership, being able to configure things, realise the benefits of the technology in-house without having to go external to pay huge fees to really, get that benefit. So yeah, it's being self-sufficient as a team, owning the product and aligning it to our business needs as we need to. I think the other thing that's actually come about in the last year or so is compliance, actually. So obviously we've got GDPR rules in now. If you look at this globally, there's various other data protection legislation, and actually it's really important now for us to be able to be compliant with these new legislations. And actually, when you look at that, certainly in business case perspective, there's a risk, right, of not being compliant. So for us, the leading cloud solutions tend to be a lot more aligned in terms of the ability to meet those requirements, do the right thing, and therefore reduce the risk of fines and other penalties.
That's fantastic to hear that. I think some different dimensions for us to dig into as we go forward around that. I'm just going to ask Max. Max, you spend a lot of time helping clients and working with them around those business case moments. Is there anything additional you'd like to add in around those benefits?
Yeah, definitely, Aaron. And I think it's interesting, having worked with both with Matt and with Jo on various parts of their journey, the journey past and parts of the journey to come, and various other clients. It's really interesting to see, even when you have very separate or very different core businesses, how similar some of those pillars around the case for change are. It's typically around, getting data right, getting data at point of need. Employee experience is absolutely the thing that we keep hearing about, making it more digital, providing more channels, being more responsive, providing less reliance on the HR function or the P&O function, as it's called in Investec. All of those things about digitizing the HR system, but also thinking of it think of it as more than an HR system, thinking of it also as a digital people system, if you will, for the next decade. So it's just interesting that, as we talk through, whilst AVEVA and Investec are very, very different businesses, the motivations for the change, I think, are quite similar in a lot of cases, maybe with a couple of nuances for Investec around your existing platform, Joe. But yeah, it's really, really exciting stuff. And I think those consistencies will resonate a lot with the listeners.
Excellent, thanks, Max. And I find it really interesting listening to both of you and talk around the fact that cost is less of a driver. Historically, it was a big driver for moving to the cloud. I think people have started to understand cloud a bit better. I think, Joe, you made the point that your anticipation is that though there'll be a change in that support model, the cost profile is possibly going to be around the same in terms of that, but you get a different effect for it, right? You get a different value for it.
Yeah, I think so. And I think our costs there will be some headcount releases over time. And I think that will be, where we streamline our interfaces, there's less duplication of data entry. And, we've got less systems to maintain going forward. So we kind of, have a bit more of a holistic approach. So we need less IT support. And so I think it will come, but yeah, it's less driven by that. And we're not trying to, it's a different conversation. Actually, it's interesting. And even like our COOs and our CFOs are less, if they want that, they want to see that ultimately, but they're aligned to the conversation about the employee experience and the kind of more strategic thinking.
Yeah. And Matt, is that similar for yourself?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, actually. I think because there are so many of what you call the soft benefits of an HR system, but I guess we've experienced a mixture, right? So people understand actually in this day and age, you need to, enhance what you've got in terms of your EVP, and a big part of that is the digital employee experience. But in my experience, you also, do need to show some cost benefits and some hard, tangible benefits of investing, of what would be significant investment, right? So it's a mixture. I think people understand, but I think it's rare to be able to get something like this through an exec without having to pull out some tangible benefits. Yeah. So yeah.
No, I agree. It's interesting. I think though that in a lot of previous cases, it may well have led with that cost agenda. I think, as you say, it's a hurdle discussion now. You have to have it, but actually, it's really interesting the engagement. I think you're both talking about there with the senior executives around their understanding of the power of the people system to help support the business. I think we certainly see that. I think, Max, don't we, in terms of some of the dialogue and discussion we're having, there's much more awareness of the power of that kind of system.
Yeah, definitely. There's much more focus on all of the goodness that can come out of the system from an experience perspective, data, etc. But and less on the cost side. But there's also a lot more, I think, these days, realization from folks that actually the journey to cloud isn't quite as easy as it once may have thought to have been, and that actually there is a real transformation program to be done with a lot of input from a lot of people to get through that transformation journey. And that sometimes can make the business case a little harder to get through when you put in the realistic implementation costs. And of course, that then links back into the being driven to being able to articulate the benefits in a very real and tangible way over and above the softer benefits.
Excellent. I agree. Thanks, Matt. And it's a great segue, because I'd like to pick up on something, Joe, that you said, which was, you're not trying to boil the ocean. And I think there's a risk of trying to do too many things and run too fast, and recognizing that moving into a cloud-based technology, you're buying that service, you're buying an evolution, you're buying something that will be with you for a period of time. And I think you've got to spend some time, therefore, on your roadmap and figuring that out. And I'm just really interested, I guess, Joe, as you've been going through that, what are the things that have influenced where you're taking your thinking on roadmap planning?
I'm always in two minds, because I get very excited about what we could do and frustrated about just getting all of the stuff that needs to be done in place. But our core system at the moment is our core HR platform and runs payroll for some of our countries, and certainly kind of interfaces data over and runs our reward processes. So that we just have to make sure we kind of get that right in our first phase. ourselves around a year really to implement that and get that up and running. So it's almost, we need to make sure we do the core current functionality like for like and get that out the door before we start kind of bolting on the other stuff. Now, I think hopefully in the first phase, we will be able to put in case management, knowledge management, and kind of, we've got quite a lot of self-service out there already. So I want to replicate that and enhance what we do for our smaller countries. But I know that there's so much more, and you can get excited about the kind of reporting and analytics you can do, or the kind of different engagement tools that you can bring in. So it's, our technology is 12 years old. So it's like going to be a transformational shift. Just getting the basics in there, actually.
Yeah.
There's so much more that I know we can, do in future and be kind of fun to play with. But I just have to rein myself back a little bit on that, get this bit done, and then we can kind of motivate, hopefully exponentially kind of change how these things look in future.
That's fantastic point, Jo. And I think, as you say, you've got a lot of options open to you and be moving into this kind of new environment, and it's just choosing the ones that will have the biggest impact up front, I guess, that will influence some of that roadmap. Matt, have you found that so far on your journey, and have you started to map out a longer term journey as well?
Yeah, I think absolutely. You've got to get the core and payroll right first, because you'll know about it if you don't, right? But yeah, I think for us, a big part of it was actually embracing the sort of HR system as being the single source of the truth for employee data. So when you factor that in with integration, you suddenly start having actually quite a big business impact in terms of all these business systems that are doing things, manually, or requesting reports or emails for new starters. You start automating that and you're reducing the manual work, our other business functions are doing. So yeah, I think a big part of it for us is moving towards that model and enforcing it from a data perspective, because really that is the foundation of the benefits you're going to get moving forward. And that can be quite challenging, right, in terms of, a lot of cases people are still used to putting things directly in payroll systems. You need to drill down or drill into people that it has to go through the HR system first, and that feeds the other systems. So that kind of culture shift is a big thing for us, and around the ownership of data as well.
Yeah.
To try to push that onto the employee and managers around self-service, to sort of reduce the burden on HR. They're probably the biggest things we're focused on.
Makes perfect sense, and clearly, as you say, one of the big advantages, as we've talked about, is that ability for leaders to make decisions that are based on data. But to get to that point, you have to get the data right, and you have to have data ownership and processes in place, and get some of that basics and build. I noticed we had a question come in from some of the attendees. I think Gary's raised one. I'm interested because it's quite timely for this discussion. We're going to save some of the questions to the end. I'm just going to ask this one now, which is, as we're talking about benefits for the business, how are your organizations sort of accepting the message of moving to the cloud? The fact that potentially, especially I think in your case, Jo, there's less options to customize that system than the old in-house kind of systems. How are you having to deal with that discussion rather than, or has that not come up at all in the discussions? I'm just interested. Jo,
I think it hasn't come up yet because we're not quite in that space yet. I think when we come into the real design element of the project, it's bound to, it'd be naive to think that it won't happen. And I think it'll probably happen less than we anticipate in a way, because I think there's enough flexibility in the solutions to kind of enable our processes. But, we've definitely got a kind of belief within our culture that, it should feel like an individual experience, but it doesn't mean that you need your processes to be different for each person. It's kind of how we use our language, how we think about our change elements of it, and actually how much do we really differ, or do we just differ because someone doesn't really know the process, they made it up and promised something, and then we've got to kind of unwind stuff rather than So there's something around that, helping leaders kind of better understand how best to do things and kind of who to bring in into the conversation initially. So I don't know, Gary. I think we're hit upon this to a certain extent, and we'll just have to kind of bring in the right people to make the decisions on how we kind of like, either change, adapt, or kind of do things in a different way potentially.
Just building on that, Jo, I'd probably add there's a subtle distinction between the cloud platform has the functionality you need. You just need to agree the sequence of steps for the particular process and agree that globally, versus actually if the cloud platform doesn't have the functionality you need and you can't customize it. So I'd sort of almost want to separate the process harmonization discussion for functionality, which is very rich and supported, versus actually there's just stuff the platform doesn't do. And there's ways around that, using PaaS platforms to customize or looking at other packages. But I think as we go through global design, touch wood, in a few months' time, actually we'll need to distinguish those two different types of change to the platform, if you will.
Yeah, I think you made a great point, Jo, about your platform, which is your old one is 12 years old, right? And there's a lot of stuff you had to customize and probably in there to cope with functionality that's now just standard, right? And I think you'll see that. I don't know, Matt, if you've had a similar experience of this kind of dialogue.
Well, I suppose we're a bit lucky in the fact that we're a software company and practicing what we preach to an extent in terms of we're trying to get our customers to move to the cloud. So, we kind of need to do it ourselves. But yeah, I mean, when you look back, I think the big point that's changed for me is that before you would really have to have best of breed systems to do a lot of the things you need to do, whereas now the good cloud solutions are doing that all in one platform. So there is, I think, a compelling case there in terms of, instead of having to have this kind of quite fragmented architecture, you can now bring it into a cloud platform that does everything pretty well, whereas that wasn't always the case, going back a few years.
Nice. It's a great point, and I just want to reiterate on that point that came up in both discussions. That standardization of process, is one thing, but then you've got, as you said, I think, Jo, the perceived flexibility or personalization of experience that you have, to Matt's point, with a new system that allows you to show, in effect, a level of perceived customization and experience that actually is just standard functionality in the system. Right? That's the way it works. That's great. And just if I may, just while we're talking about design and around that side of things, you're entering into those stages. What are the things that you're prioritizing, Jo, around your blueprint and your design?
I guess, it does come down to the, understanding what we've got at the moment and what we want to replicate going forwards. It's also really understanding the pain points that we have at the moment, and therefore how we try and address those going forwards. And some of that is around, it really is around our interfaces out, and kind of like, getting rid of our manual processes. But also I think it is, how can we use the system to kind of really help people through a journey of something? For example, I want to leave the organization. How can we kind of create that journey for a leader, for an individual, make it clear and step by step, but make it feel kind of warm and friendly through the comms we use, and I think it gives us an opportunity where we've got team members who are at the moment just processing data through systems. That's when they can reach out to that individual. That's when they can support them. So that's where I think we can transform what we offer as a P&O community to perform that high touch element, but using the technology to kind of get rid of, the kind of administration part of it. So, I think it's a common kind of phrase, the high tech, high touch. And it allows us to kind of really think about what that high touch looks like with our current team members who are, highly skilled and empathetic and motivated to create a different environment for our employees, but don't always have the time to do so. So there's masses of opportunity, I think.
Yeah.
Technology to support this.
Yeah, and I think Jo, just also as we've been talking at various times, getting those key design decisions clear, getting the experience design and the service design done up front, so that when the SI lands for the configuration, it's very, very clear what you as a business want to be getting out of the platform. So you get, you know, the most rapid configuration and implementation you can.
It is, and I think we're doing lots of work at the moment, engaging across all of our P&O teams, just to kind of get that thinking, so we're aligned. So we're not, when we're kind of coming to design workshops, yes, there will be different things we need to think about in our different locations. But actually, if we've got the same kind of vision and clarity of vision, then when we're having to make a little bit of a tweak here and there, we kind of understand why, and we can explain that to our stakeholders, and everyone can explain that. It's not just a small team kind of in a room doing this. It's and we are starting to think about how we engage some senior, or not necessarily senior, but just some kind of visible business owners and leaders as part of that design as well. So, you know, it's not being thrown over the fence by the HR team. The business are part of the design and thinking, and I think that's really important. So we're an organisation that likes talking a lot and getting lots of people involved. You know, but we need to do this as well. We need to go into action implementation. So what's that balance look like? But I think we've been doing a lot of thinking over the past, I guess, you know, with Max as well, over the past 6 months, about how do we approach some of these things. And by doing that, we've engaged lots of people in that journey already. So, you know, when it comes to change and transition, we've started that thinking already. And, you know, at any kind of opportunity I have within a kind of exec meeting or a Manco meeting, I just throw out the fact that this is coming.
Yeah.
Just like no detail, but just keep, you know, just make sure it's on people's agenda and radar. So that's not, you know, necessarily answering your question in the detailed design questions, but it's about the approach. I think we just keep talking to.
Well, the approach is really, really key, as you say, Jo, and I'm interested, Matt, from your perspective, you know, as you went through this point that Jo and Max were making about decisions early as a business, so you understand what you really want out of the system. How much did that play out for you?
I think it's really important. Yeah, I mean, one thing we found actually, it's really important to understand your as-is state. For us particularly, we've gone through a couple of acquisitions, so we've acquired companies, we've inherited architecture, and actually, you know, it was quite challenging trying to find out what actually existed. And obviously, until you know that, you don't know whether what you've got is fit for purpose or not. So it's very hard to build a business case around that. So I think, you know, I guess it applies if you're new into a role, new into a business. You've got to get that understanding of what exists currently and what it's used for. So that was a big piece of work for us. And then we could do a analysis of you know, whether that was fit for purpose or not, and kind of Max helped us out with that. So yeah, I think that's the first point. The other bit for us was around actually working with the business leaders in terms of what are actually the things you are struggling with, and what are the things you would like to see from an HR function. So if you can get that buy-in and get those you know, key points identified early, you can then start to base decisions around meeting those key organisational requirements from your business leaders. Yeah.
Aaron,
I think you might be on mute. You win the mute bingo for the day.
I win the mute bingo. I'm glad our marketing director isn't here listening to this webinar. He'd be all over it at the moment with me. It's his favourite catch. But thank you, Max, for pointing that one out. I will avoid that. Classic, glad it was me. Thank you. In the chat. Right, so a couple other questions, if I may. And we've touched on some of these, and then I'm going to do a little summary and then open it up to some more questions from the floor. You know, we've been talking about that run up to the business case, the thinking you need to do, that early design stage. But I think one of the other things that sticks in our mind around this, when you're looking at the journey to the cloud and your first steps towards it, ironically, is also thinking about what happens once you get there, right? And what does post go live look like? Because you're buying a service from a company that's going to continue to provide updates for you, etc. And you've got to handle those in some way. Jo, in terms of post go live, how it's very early in the stage for you right now, and you're still building that case. How much has that had to play into your thinking?
We're certainly starting to think about what the change impact will be, and how we think about adoption of the system. And I think it's how we kind of sell the value of it as well, I suppose. So, for leaders, having dashboards, having data, being able to, more easily see what's happening in their teams. We've got a lot of information about that in terms of the requests we typically get and kind of like how they're engaging with our HR consultants. From an employee perspective, what's the purpose? Let me understand it. So we're trying to think of that narrative, I suppose, to help us land these things. I'm not overly concerned in some ways because we've got a lot of self-service and people have to go onto the current system. It will be better, whatever we do. We have a horrendous password that we have to put into our system, which no one ever remembers. So the fact that we won't have that in future it's a ridiculously big win. Can't even underestimate that. So I think there'll be some excitement about it. But I think there is something about what that ongoing roadmap looks like, how we keep engaging. I think there's a real responsibility, which is probably maybe changed in some organisations over the past few years, about actually P&O or the HR team need to lead this thinking, and it doesn't come from IT. And so there's a kind of movement in responsibilities about what the roadmap looks like and how it's implemented, which was potentially, it's certainly, maybe prior to me joining Investec, was kind of led by the IT team rather than the HR team. We were kind of like on the kind of following behind. So I think there's a shift in responsibility as well, which may be different in different organisations, but it's, and there's, I think part of the reason it's taken us a little while to get to movement on the cloud solution was kind of that bit of jostling and a bit of kind of like different leadership in different areas to kind of take up that mantle in a different way.
Yeah, and to be fair, Jo, we see that in quite a few clients, but the really interesting thing is in the future, you tend to see a strong HRIS function within the HR team, similar to the one that Matt runs, and then IT still involved, but providing more of the technical support for the very hands-on tech stuff around integrations, around coding, etc. So I think what you're sort of thinking, it aligns pretty well with a lot of organisations.
Certainly, and Matt and Max mentioned there your role on that and the cloud support. Have you seen that change?
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate of the HR function owning the HR technology. I think it's really important in terms of, you need to align it with the HR goals, and you need people who understand how HR people work, how they think. So yeah, I think that's a big part for me. And I think the other part is moving actually to a more global process owner model. So instead of it's just being an HRIS team or an HR technology team who own the tool and do everything with that, you're actually working with your HR COEs, whether it's the reward team, your performance development team, your recruitment team, and actually getting them to own part of the system and working with them really closely so you're aligned to what their needs are, what their goals are. So it's a joint ownership of the tool, and really as an HRIS function, we are driven by what the global process owners want from the system. So yeah, much more of a partnership and joined up thinking rather than it just be a sort of HRIS team working on their own.
That's a fantastic point, Matt, especially your point about the global process owners, their engagement in this and that upskilling so they understand the functionality as well is a big part of this getting ready and making sure that everybody in HR understands their role. And as Jo mentioned, how that role shifts for the different stakeholders once you go through this journey.
I think the other point, sorry, Aaron, it's just that a lot of the HRS functionality and the benefits you get rely on your key users doing things the right way and understanding that. If you can't get your users to do what they need to be doing in the right way, you're going to struggle to get the benefits out. So again, it's really important that your HR teams understand that. So yeah, just
it's a very good point, Matt. And interestingly, I think you've preempted one of the questions I was going to ask you that's come up in the chat in a minute, which is, and then I'm just going to pre-warn you both, I'm going to ask you for some lessons learned in a minute, just to share with everybody, just so you can think about that. But one of the questions that has come up, which ties to your point, Matt, is, this, and you've both mentioned this along the way, the role of self-service, right? And the fact that moving to a cloud environment with new functionality, new systems capability, you open up that ability to do more self-service. And some of that is about work coming, which is people management work. So in the hands of business leaders, but being more accessible in self-service. But they have to do more than they've had to do before. How much does sort of getting not just HR ready, but getting the business ready for a new way of working with talent and with people forming part of your thinking? Matt, if I may start with you first around that.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I think the important thing I've seen is that if you can, you need to try and understand what employees want from an HR system. And it may be challenging to get that directly, but if you try and look at your engagement, pull out some things from your engagement surveys, or even just try and do some focus groups ahead of implementation, you can normally get a good feel for what employees are wanting. And it's the old question of actually you're asking us to do more, right? But actually, when you look at the way trends are going in terms of how employees want to manage things in their day-to-day working life, a lot of that is now actually an expectation that, if I want to be able to go and look at something or do something, I should be able to do that. I shouldn't have to ask someone. So I think it is aligning with that trend. And obviously, a cloud solution that's intuitive, easy to use, makes that self-sufficiency a lot easier. The other part of that is insight, right? So a lot of our managers are really hungry for data, for analytics that we just cannot give them. So, the analytic capability, the reporting capability that you would hopefully improve would really help with that insight in terms of decision making and other things.
Excellent, thanks, Matt. And Jo, I'm going to ask you a similar question in saying, just get your perspective and around that. But just before I do, we're going to head into Q&A in a minute after lessons learned discussion. So if you are listening in and you want to raise any questions, please do so, and we'll try and address the ones that we can as a panel. Jo, your thoughts around the whole manager self-service, employee self-service?
Very similar themes to Matt, and I think there's a few approaches. I think some of it, the perceived, I'm doing this extra task, and I think there's something about kind of breaking that down. Are you actually doing that extra task, or are you just doing it in a different way? So are you now going online to kind of complete details and tell us prior to sending an email to someone with the probably where you didn't have half the details and we'd have to go back, and it creates a whole heap of work. So there's something around, because it will be felt as extra, and it's kind of uncovering whether that is actually true or not. So I think that's an element to our change process. I think we've got this strategy as a P&O team. Other teams have got the same strategy as well. So I think there's other support functions potentially kind of asking managers to go into another system to do something that they previously didn't have to do. So I think there's potentially a bit of overwhelm within the organisation of more and more coming out with various different kind of support functions asking for the same, asking for more, them to do more self-service. So I'm just very, I guess I'm quite attuned to that at the moment, and that feeling and kind of like feeling of overwhelm.
Yeah.
Of now I'm being asked to do this, now I'm being asked to do this, and now you're expecting me to manage my team. What? My HR person used to do that for me. They used to write my performance objectives, and so there's some real, I guess, resetting of expectations for our leaders, and I think we just need to be really working with, especially the consultants who work really closely with our leaders, about what regular temperature checks on how that's feeling, because people can shut down quite easily on these things. So I think the value that Matt was talking about kind of being able to get insight and data quickly, we need to really think about kind of how we really demonstrate the value alongside kind of the idea that they may be doing more tasks than they previously did. It's a really fine balance, because I think
it's a very good point, Jo.
Yeah, there's so much going on in people's lives, both in and outside of work at the moment. So the other thing I'm thinking is it's about the multiple ways to do data. So actually, if I want to still send an email, that can go into the case management system, and that may help us kind of like identify the type of query and process it. If I want, I'd love to be able to as I sit at home and ask Alexa to book my holiday through the HR system, so I can just do it when so how do I integrate my kind of personal technology into my work technology? I think there's it's a little way off, but our thinking needs to be about how do we make these things easy as possible. Wow.
Yeah, I think you said a few times in some of the answers around that sort of in the line of work, right? As they're working, it's just seamless that they're doing also some of the HR transactions. It just doesn't feel like a step out. I think, as you say, for an experience basis is very important. So I'm going to move on, if I may, onto lessons learned. And just while you're thinking through some lessons learned to share, we had a question come in from Tonchi on the call, just around, how has this experience started to differ for you between this and a more traditional transformation? And what are the kind of lessons you've learned, if you're thinking about this compared to a more traditional transformation? What are the things specific to cloud that you'd call out as lessons learned? We've touched on a few of those, but it'd be great just to see what your thoughts were. So maybe Matt, if I can start with you.
Yeah, I think there's two main ones that I've seen. The first is probably understand your baselines. Understand how long it's taking you to fill a vacancy, how much it's costing you to fill a vacancy, what your attrition level is, because inevitably you'll be asked to show some sort of improvement in that. So it's really important before you start the project to try and get a grasp of how long things are taking you and how much the cost is, because then you can start to show an improvement. The second part of it is I think more of a focus on releases. So we see in cloud products that releases are a huge part of what they do, right? So generally you'll have either 2 or 4, I think, really huge releases a year. So it's really important to keep on top of that in terms of taking on the functionality, making sure you have either dedicated people or a person who's focused on the releases, can review them, look at what's going to be useful for your organization, because you're paying a lot of money for these cloud products, and to maximize that investment you need to really try and adopt as much as you can in terms of new functionality that they're releasing. And I think that's obviously different from the legacy on-premise solution. So yeah, there's a big focus on release for me.
Excellent, thanks Matt. And it's almost like you read Gary's mind on the chat there. He was raising exactly that point around making sure that you focus on those. So well timed answer, I think, in terms of that, and the governance that goes with it to make sure there's ownership in HR for making the decisions around those changes. Certainly is one of the things we've found. Quite often the technology team are ready for making a change, but the HR function hasn't quite got the governance right for making choices or decisions around policy or decision or process to make use of that. Jo, anything else you'd like to add on lessons learned?
Yeah, I'm just going to follow up on the governance piece as well, because I think that's something I'm learning actually, is that governance, it's kind of applying some of the structured governance that we have in place for our on-prem solution and thinking about it potentially in a lighter touch, but making sure we've got all of the right people involved, even in a cloud solution. So we've been a little bit burnt with our recruitment system recently, where they've kind of had things that have come up in their release. But actually, that wasn't just a kind of functionality, and we needed a lot more people internally to kind of help us implement that. And it was kind of sold to us as really simple. This is just extra functionality, go do. And we find out we're the first clients to use it, and it hasn't really been thought through and, you know, enough to know who to bring in from an internal perspective. So it's delayed us. So I think there is a bit of naivety I had with cloud solutions in terms of it would be easy to kind of implement these different changes, and it isn't always. So just making sure that the right holistic group are kind of looking at the kind of like the new releases and they're considered. So I think that's quite something I hadn't really anticipated with the cloud so much in terms of how we kind of structure things.
That's a great lesson, Jo. I think you're right. There's an expectation, I think, with cloud that you get this great new ability to have new functionality arrive, and it'll just slot into your business and it'll be fine. You just press a button, off it will go. You know, which is for the technology, yes. For the process, the policy, the ways of working, the behaviours can mean quite a large change for you as an organisation.
But actually, for the technology, we found a barrier. So we're kind of ready from a process perspective, and found that we needed to do more integration with something, or think about things a different way, or bring in our InfoSec team to look at stuff. So it's both. It's definitely both.
Excellent. And I'm conscious, Max, we're down to our last few minutes, so I'm going to ask you to be relatively brief, but I do want to get to you on your thoughts on lessons learned.
Yes, I think, and actually it links directly to Tonchi's question. So I think one of my biggest lessons learned would be that, you know, implementing a cloud platform is a transformation. It's not magic. It doesn't install itself. You still need integration work. You still need data work, people, process, experience work, etc. I think that the difference is that it's not the same as a transformation you would have run on an on-premise system. So the mix of skills you need within the team for a cloud transformation are much more business focused, change focused, organization focused, config focused, and you still need some IT skills around the integration and some of the architecture stuff, and particularly in InfoSec, which we all have scars from dealing with at different times, I'm sure. But the interesting thing is it's still a transformation program, but it's not the same transformation program as it would have been if this was an on-prem world. You don't need people stacking servers in a data center. You don't need people writing huge amounts of code. So all of those skills sort of move out of the transformation program, outside of integration, but then the business skills, the change skills become so much more important. So I think that's driving a lot of changes across the industry, actually, that we're seeing reflected across most of our projects at the moment.
Excellent. Thanks, Max. And I'm going to bring us to a close now. And before I say a big thank you to our panelists, just a little bit of a summary, I guess, in terms of what I've heard through this session, which has been fantastic. Thank you so much to all three of you. I think, you know, understand your as is really well. Think about what you want. Focus and don't boil the ocean, to quote Jo there on that. You know, make sure you understand where you're delivering things. Focus on the ongoing roadmap, knowing that this is going to be with you for a long time, and get that early business buy-in and engagement to help you with that prioritization and decision making and engagement early. And in building your case for that move to the cloud, you know, think about the key things that, you know, experience clearly is much higher on the list these days. We talked about cost being a hurdle, but still needing to be addressed. We talked about risk and making sure that compliance, Matt made that point, make sure that forms part of it and you understand that, and also the access to decision making through data and the importance that that puts to both to the benefits for the business, but also the work you have to do. So lots of things, I think, for people to take away. and lots to summarize there. I think if I just may ask you to, Matt and Jo, just to reflect, exciting or not exciting move to the cloud for each of you. Jo?
Really exciting.
Excellent.
You know, it is. I feel I spent my first 3 years at Investec trying to persuade people to kind of go on this journey, and actually now I think we're at a position as an organisation we are really excited about it. So no, it's
brilliant.
I have to enjoy the journey. I know that, but I can't wait to kind of get it out there.
Fantastic. And Matt, yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. It keeps me employed, but additional to that, no, I think it's a huge opportunity for HR to start becoming more of a transformational function, you know, rather than a transactional admin type function. So it's a huge opportunity to move more to that strategic function that I think we're all striving to get to. So yeah, really exciting.
Great. And on behalf of Latham, Max and myself and the people on the call, thank you so much for spending the time with us, Jo and Matt. We really appreciate it. For those listening in, webinar has been recorded and available. Please share it as well. If any of you have friends who want to listen to, or colleagues you know might want to listen to it, it'll be on our website and published very shortly and accessible through Lace Partners. Thanks everyone again. Have a lovely afternoon, Matt and Jo and Max. Appreciate all your input today. Thank you so much.